Add another problem to the growing pile at Fulton County DA Fani Willis's feet. House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan has subpoenaed Willis for information on spending by her office following bombshell audio of a whistleblower informing the DA that her top aide was engaged in misuse of federal funds. As a reminder, Willis is also under investigation for impropriety related to hiring her alleged boyfriend, Nathan Wade, to serve as the special prosecutor in former President Trump's election fraud case in Georgia.
Willis has not yet responded to Jordan's most recent subpoena. I guess you got to RSVP to those. But she previously wrote that, quote, settled constitutional law clearly permits me to ignore your unjustified and illegal intrusion. While at another point calling the efforts by the GOP, quote, bullying by members of Congress. Willis added, your attempt to invoke congressional authority to intrude upon and interfere with an active criminal case in Georgia is flagrantly at odds with the Constitution. So strong words coming from Fani Willis. Of course, the investigation into how she hired an attorney she had a romantic relationship with to be the top prosecutor on the case is at the center of this, but very interesting that some former staffers say that they were fired immediately after asking about the misuse of federal funds allocated to the DA's office. So that's very interesting, but we'll see what comes of those allegations. I assume it's, Jordan's plan to then subpoena and get the testimony from those employees.
Yeah, there was one woman in particular who was on this audio tape. It was leaked to the Washington Free Beacon, reported on, I believe, by Andrew Kerr over there. And in the audio, she's actually in DA Willis's office and talking to her about how she feels that she was retaliated against because she called out her superior for trying to misuse federal grant funds. So apparently this person that she was working under was trying to use the money for travel and for whatever else he was trying to use it for that was against the grant. She said that she tried to warn him that the grant was very specific about what the money could be used for. And then he subsequently took her off multiple cases that she was working on and started bad-mouthing her around the office. So in the audio, she's basically on the verge of tears in DA Willis's office telling her about all that's transpired. And I gotta say, DA Willis could not be any more sympathetic to this woman. She basically goes on about how, well, if that's how you feel, then I'm sorry that you felt that way. But of course, you could always go to HR. And apparently, the woman responds that she felt like she couldn't go to HR because the guy had poisoned HR against her or something to that effect. And DA Willis just kind of brushes her off. Then the woman ended up being fired later on after she brought these allegations to DA Willis. And so that's even a separate thing from the allegations about Nathan Wade and her relationship with him, which is where congressional involvement comes in. So when DA Willis is accusing Jim Jordan of interfering with the election fraud case, it's not exactly accurate. I mean, in an indirect way, possibly, if she were to get pulled off of the case for these misconduct allegations. But the reality is that this specific one is in a completely separate incident from what's going on with the Trump trial. This is a question of the misuse of federal grant funds, which would definitely put it under the purview of Congress because they are the ones that, of course, approve the money to be made available for those federal grants. They, therefore, have the ultimate oversight over how those grants are spent and if they're being used improperly.
Yeah, I think if anyone's a little bit upset about this prosecution of Fani Willis, I can understand being annoyed that a lot of the accountability public officials get in the United States is usually in the direction of blue team versus red team. It can be a little annoying when you see the GOP calling for the prosecution and investigation of prominent members of the blue team that are Democrats. And yeah, that happens. I wish it was more across the board, but I don't think that means it's like a bad thing when it does happen. I think any prosecution of corruption is good for the country. And if we find it, we should weed it out. If Fani Willis is in the middle of all of this and she thinks it's getting in the way of the Trump case, put another attorney on it, put another prosecutor on that case. So her being in the middle of it is a distraction. If that's her thoughts, I think this congressional subpoena is about an independent matter. Is Jim Jordan doing it? Because Fani Willis has been the subject of a lot of, public attention because of this Georgia case around the 2020 election fraud. Of course. But does it really matter? No. It's weeding out corruption. I just wish people like Jim Jordan would do it across the board. And I think it matters in that sense that, they really need to use their authority to investigate corruption, not just when it's convenient political opponents.
Yeah, I agree. I think the American people want to see corruption rooted out across both political parties at all levels of the government. And unfortunately, it's something that's become very commonplace. And just to remind viewers a little bit about what's going on with the Nathan Wade case, Nathan Wade's soon-to-be ex-wife, who's filing divorce right now, is basically calling for Fani Willis to come testify in that case. In fact, they've issued a subpoena for her because she believes that they were, in fact, engaging in an affair while they were still married, and that Nathan Wade was using the nearly $1 million that he was being paid to investigate the former president on lavish vacations that he took with the DA, Fani Willis. So, I mean, even at the very least, if they weren't engaged in some kind of sexual or romantic relationship, it would be hard to argue that he was not being inappropriate or misusing funds by taking her on these vacations in exchange for him being put on this case and then subsequently being charged to be one of the lead prosecutors, especially considering this guy does not have any experience prosecuting a crime of this nature. This is a very serious charge. She charged Donald Trump under RICO statutes. And this guy's experience amounts to him basically being a judge in family court.
Yeah, and there was some admission of guilt when Fani Willis addressed that church. She said she's an imperfect person. She wasn't saying they're lying, they're painting me as a bad person, there's no truth in any of these allegations. It seemed that there was some accountability taken, which in that case, if you are really having a romantic relationship with someone you appoint to be the top prosecutor, they get a pay raise, and that money, I'm sure, went to pay for a part of that vacation. I mean, it's too many obvious actions one after the next. It's time to step aside in that case. And also, as a legal-minded person, as a prosecutor, you have to be aware that there's something a little bit off about that pattern of behavior and use of power. And it seems to me that that's pretty standard operating procedure for a lot of people in public office in America, which is why I do say the prosecution is good. But many people across the country care a lot about 2024 and what happened in 2020, the days following the election, the allegations that the election was stolen. In many cases, there was no evidence found whatsoever. Some cases we still haven't heard. But there really hasn't been a founding for any of the allegations from Trump and his aide saying that there was fraud. And so in this case of Georgia, we really need a proper investigation into it before 2024. And I think Fani Willis is getting in the way of that at this point. So if you care about this case, you should be a little bit more upset about Fani Willis's personal actions getting in the way of it than the prosecution of it.
It's also fascinating that Fani Willis has multiple clips that have now come out prior to 2020, I believe, where she actually explicitly says that she would punish people who were found having romantic or sexual relationships with other people in the workplace. In these public panels, basically, she talks about how terrible it is for morale and for office ethics for people to be sleeping with one another. And yet, here we are. That's going to do it for us today on Rising. Just as always, great spending Rising Fridays with you.
Another good Friday.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you next Friday.
Bye, y'all.